In today's episode of the Paul Summer podcast, I get to talk to Ifeanyi, a data scientist at the World Bank working in the governance global practice with a background spanning economics, industrial engineering, and applied economics. His work sits at the intersection of data, policy, and global development. In this conversation, we explore his journey into data science, his experience working with organizations like the UN, and how data and technology are used to measure poverty and inform real world policy decisions around the world. From satellite imagery and machine learning to global poverty measurement, this episode was a fascinating look at how data is shaping development policy at a global scale.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you do now? Fine.
So I'm a data scientist. I work at the World Bank. I am currently assigned to what is now called the governance global practice. So I'm on the global team within the governance department. I'm based here in DC.
Governance. Can you say that again? Governance World Bank.
So I'm in the governance global practice. I guess it's like a department within the World Bank. I guess that from your own perspective, I think that's one way to think about it. So it's the governance global practice. So the bank is sort of demarcated into departments. Well, we call them global practices. Sometimes some people call them departments. It depends on who you talk to. But and there are several of them. I used to be in poverty. I used to be in what was called poverty and inequality global practice. Now I am in the governance global practice. Or the global practices are basically divided into regions. The bank's regions right now, you can find this online, are uh, so there is Africa. So Africa got split into two: Africa East and Africa West. Then there
Okay.
is South Asia, the South Asia region, SAR. There is what they call MENAP now, which is the Middle East, North Africa, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, I believe. And then you have ECA region, so Europe, Central Asia. I'm on the global team, so each one of these regions means that there's typically like a country economist or a
Yeah.
governance specialist who's based in some country inside, and his job is that country's work, and sort of that he's that interface between on that issue with between the World Bank and the government, right? So
All
that's
right.
generally how the bank is. And then for those of us who work in on the global teams, we generally are based in DC, and we serve pretty much all the regions. And we create knowledge
Okay.
products, we support their operations. That's what that's not.
All right. Okay, that's perfect. Now, before we get into anything, can you just give us or give me rather a brief overview of what exactly the World Bank is?
Okay, so the World Bank is, I suppose you can call it an international organization.
Right.
It's in the same sort of bracket as like the UN and some of these other international organizations. And fundamentally, its work is sort of in broad strokes. You can say it's kind of divided into two, right? So it does operations, which is to say money is given to the government to, lend to the government. So the World Bank is a bank, right? So it lends money to governments to do specific sort of projects, development projects, so to speak, and then it monitors how those projects are going. Broadly speaking, that's sort of the layman's view of what the bank does. On one side, the other side is the sort of, and I'm talking specifically about my own fault, like the sort of my own section, the IBRD section of the bank. That's one side. The other side of it is creating knowledge products, so to speak. So people typically look at the bank for development knowledge, right? So what do we do to reduce poverty rates in our countries? What can we do to improve the institutional capacity of governments to be able to provide services to people in the country, right? How do we provide better electricity? How do we provide this? How do we provide that? So the government, the banks, people look to the bank. So governments look to the bank to provide that knowledge, which eventually feeds into operations, and then the bank also uses its knowledge from the operations it's running to also feed the knowledge that it also. So it's a sort of it's an integrated system essentially in that sense. So broadly speaking, that's what the bank does.
Okay, that makes sense. Damn, I have a lot of questions. Following up
Please
that.
fire on.
Okay,
I will disclaim. I will give a small disclaimer. I'm just a data scientist, ultimately. So yes, if you want the sort of higher level, the sort of nitty gritty understanding of everything that a bank does, I might not be the best person,
okay.
but I'll give it to you from
No,
my
no,
perspective,
it's fine.
from my view, because the
Okay.
bank is very much varied along those lines. But I will sort of give you my own from my own perspective how I interact with the work that we do. So
Oh no, definitely. I'll try my best not to sidetrack because
yes.
like I have a specific framework I want this thing to go. So um okay, in regard exactly okay, who owns the World Bank exactly? Like it's since since I don't know, it sounded is it an NGO? Can you categorize it as an NGO? Like
And yeah, that's a good question. I don't know how. I'm not sure. So I guess international energy. It's a bank. We make loans to countries, right? So
oh
it's
loan,
literally a bank.
okay, oh but
We give
oh
loans, we give
okay, it's
grants
literally a
with
bank. Okay, okay, that makes
yes,
sense.
fundamentally we're a bank, right? So I guess you could say countries are shareholders at the bank, right? So I think the United States is the largest shareholder. Don't quote me on this. This is what I think. If my memory serves me right, the World Bank, sorry, the
Okay.
United States is the largest shareholder, which is why we're based here in DC, and the United States seems to make a lot of the biggest decisions that affect how the bank seems to operate, right? So whoever the president of the United States is gets to determine
Yeah.
who the president of the World Bank will be. So Biden was the one who,
Oh,
yeah. So
okay.
Biden was the one who appointed our current president, and whenever his term is done, whoever U.S. president is will appoint the next one, unless for whatever reason we're no longer here in the United States, whatever. But I think the United States is a 17% share of the World Bank.
Yeah, it is. It is. I just checked now. 17 to 16%.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think Korea, is it Japan that is next at 6 or something like that, and so on and so forth. So different countries have different level of share within the World Bank. Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. So now let's narrow down a bit and let's get to your stuff.
Yeah.
So okay, first of all, you're a data scientist. Let's start with your journey into the field, and then let's talk about your work at poverty.
Yes.
Exactly. So you can, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I guess I can start with okay. So I first of all my academic background. Actually, people are typically surprised by this. Is actually I was a double major in economics and industrial engineering, and then I minored in
Yep.
applied math. Right. So I did this at Lehigh University. I graduated in 2012, and then I went on to go get a master's at Duke for a year in economics. And then after that, I went to work
Sorry,
for
could you
yes.
disclose your age when you
Oh, oh,
graduated?
oh, oh!
I
I'm
don't
old
know if
now. I'm
that's
36.
oh right, okay, okay, okay.
Yes, I'm 36. I turned 37 in a month, but yeah, I'm 36.
Okay, so when you graduated from undergrad, how old were you?
22, 23, 23, 23.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, so I was 23 when I graduated
Right.
from undergrad. So I finished, and then I went to Duke. I was there for about a year and change. Got my master's, and then I came. I worked for the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa in Ethiopia.
Okay.
I was in Addis for a while. So I was there for about 9 months. I was a research fellow. I was doing research on the use of technology in Ethiopian banks. So long ago now. And then I finished from that. I worked in the UN system a little bit for a few months as a volunteer. I was doing statistical work for the United Nations Population Fund in Nigeria, in the Nigeria office actually. And then I that was basically like an interim thing that I was doing between my work for ECA and getting into grad school. So I got my PhD in applied economics and public policy. I was
Public
at the
policy.
RAND Corporation, so the Party RAND Graduate School in Santa Monica. So I was there from 2015 to 2019. Then I moved to DC January 2nd, 2020. I moved to DC. So it's funny. So So I tell people this. I get here. I think within a month or so, everything just shut down because of COVID. So that was interesting. I had no
Oh
friends.
yeah.
Nothing. I was stuck in an apartment writing code every day. So that was an interesting thing in and of itself. But from a data science perspective, I think the journey for me in data science probably would have started. I started writing code. I've been writing code since I was maybe in high school. I took a summer course in statistics at Georgetown University while I was in high school, and that was basically what started this whole coding thing. And then I got into college, and they teach you C++ in your first year, so that was like the first thing I started. That was the first probably proper language that I learned to code in. And then this whole data science revolution. I wouldn't say data science revolution before they started calling it data science. I would say I was a computational social scientist, so to speak, right? So I was working at Rand, and as a PhD student, you have to do what we call on-the-job training, OJT, right? So you have half your time spent on doing work for the Rand Corporation as an assistant policy researcher, and the other half of your time is spent actually taking classes, doing research, that sort of thing, for your own dissertation and stuff. So I was doing this at the time at Rand, and one way we have something of an internal labor market at Rand, right? So they're the what we call PI, so the principal investigators, the people who are actually writing the
Oh,
proposals, getting the research.
Ifeanyi, sorry to cut you there.
Yeah.
Can you tell us like what's the full meaning of Rand?
Oh,
Just to yeah.
I don't think so. Rand is not like an acronym, by the way.
Oh really?
Yeah, I don't. At least I've never known it to be an acronym. Maybe I'm wrong about this.
Okay.
But that's where I went to grad school, and we never. Yeah, it's not really an acronym. Rand is someone's Party Rand. I believe is someone's name.
Okay.
Yeah. So
it's a grad school basically.
Rand, yeah. So Rand is a. I'm sorry. No.
It's a grad school.
Corporation. The Rand Corporation is actually the largest policy research think tank. At least at some point, it used to be the largest policy think tank, I believe, in the world. Don't quote me on that. Maybe do some research about that. But I know it used to be like one of the top ranked, highest ranked in terms of size and just sheer volume of its publications and all of that, the largest. And it was started, I believe it was 1948 it started. And the whole idea was the U.S. Air Force was trying to figure out how do we actually make decisions around the policies that affect, like, this is, the aftermath of World War II,
Yeah.
How do we make policies around, like, how do we make policies that use both economics and engineering and some of these things to actually make better decisions? And so they started the Rand Corporation to help solve that problem. So they brought economists, they brought engineers, they brought all kinds of people from all walks of life and put them all in the same building and said, okay, go and conquer, more or less. And all these projects. And then that was basically where the graduate school became an offspring of that now said, okay, we need to raise professionals, right, who actually combine these skills. So the program, as I have it, is actually a combination, is a little bit of, I call it applied economics, but there is the applied economics element, there's economics, there's a public policy, there's an engineering element of it. So there are all these things that we had to be sort of taught to be able to come out with a PhD from Rand, essentially. So that's basically what Rand is. So from my own perspective, data science, when I started, it was strange for me to be called a data scientist. I still kind of find it strange when people call me data scientist now, because originally what I did actually was I used to build simulations, right? I used to build a lot of simulations, a lot of statistical models and mathematical models, basically taking policy phenomenon that we see and basically translating them into like statistical models and numbers that we see, numbers essentially, and using them to help government inform policies. So that was originally my thing. So just to give you an example, I was part of this development team for a huge micro simulation model in here in the United States while I was still at Rand, called Compare. So it's comparative assessments of reform efforts, and basically they use that to essentially model Obamacare, and basically, at least the last I heard, they still, I don't know if to this day they still use it, but they're basically using it now still to look at the impact of specific policies, right, in the health space on outcomes like coverage. So how many people will have health insurance, that sort of thing, right? So it was a huge simulation model of the United States healthcare system. I worked on another one. I worked on several other simulations in my time at Rand. My own dissertation actually built micro simulation of dementia care in the United States. So what would be the demand for
Yeah,
dementia care going forward?
I
America is
saw
an
that.
aging
Yeah.
population, stuff like that. So those kinds of things. I started doing a little bit of machine learning along the way as well because you have a statistics background. Why not, right?
This was which year?
I'm sorry.
This
So this
was
would have been
which year?
2015. This would have been like 2015.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so this would have been like 2015. So I started doing a little bit of machine learning as well. So using neural network models to try to figure out like, okay, so in a country like the United States, can we actually use administrative data? So like the RAND HRS, which is the RAND Health and Retirement Study. Can we use that kind of data? So basically collect data on people, I think 55 and up. It's a huge longitudinal study that collects data on people 55 years and up, and it collects a host of sort of data, administrative data about them, as well as some of their health data as well. So the question is, can we actually use that data to actually figure out who's likely to have dementia, right? Using a neural network model, right? The idea being a lot of people like brain scans are very expensive, are super expensive. I think at the time when I did this was about $6,000 a pop just for a brain scan, right? So if we can use basic administrative data to figure out your likelihood of having,
What does a basic administrative data look like exactly?
well, it depends. It varies, right? So administrative data
Okay.
tends to be data that comes from government. So I don't know if actually the term administrative data, because this is longitudinal. This is a longitudinal study, and they go and they collect data from a wide range of old people, basically.
What do you mean data? You mean like biometrics?
Well, so it's yeah. So they're collecting some. They're collecting some biometric data from
Okay.
old people from an older population. Oh, my memory is leaving me now. I think that's what it was. It's been a while now.
All right.
But yeah, so it's a mixture of that. It's a mixture of also collecting just basic information about their age,
Oh,
working status, like things like that. So it's a health and retirement study, right? So the HRS. So they're collecting that kind of information from people, and the idea now becomes: can I use that kind of information, right?
to
Because some of it is
predict
also biometric,
dementia.
to actually predict the likelihood that someone is going to have dementia,
Oh,
right?
okay.
Now, the thing that I learned, if my memory serves me right, is that actually you can't do that, but you can actually figure out whether or not someone needs to go get a brain scan, right? Or whether or not they shouldn't go spend money on a brain scan. So we might not be able to say, oh, you have dementia, but we can definitely say, we can say with fairly good confidence using the model and using the person's information to say, okay, maybe it's not worth your time actually going to spend money on a brain scan, which it might not be figuring out whether or not someone has dementia or is likely to have dementia, but it is there are cost savings there for individuals, right, and for insurance companies as well. So that was at least that was, I think that was the third paper of my dissertation, I believe.
How long
So
did that take? Just curious.
that took, well, the data was already ready, right, and
Okay.
the data was already ready. Neural network, the algorithms that the neural network models already exist. I didn't have to actually sit down and write my
Oh,
own.
okay.
So all I have
Oh,
to do,
oh,
yeah,
oh.
yeah. So all I have to do is basically take a model and apply it to data set. So in a
Hmm.
few weeks, I had written the paper already, right? Partly also because they tell you when you're a PhD student, the best dissertation is a completed one. So this is one of those. At the time, I had already gotten the job at the bank, and I needed to finish my dissertation quickly. So this was the quick thing that I could finish and just get off. So that was the last paper of my dissertation. So I finished that, and then I started working at the bank. I was hired in the poverty practice as a data scientist. So my work originally, when I first joined the poverty practice, was sort of divided into two, right? So there was the element of my work that was poverty measurement. So if you go online right now, you type poverty rate Nigeria, that number probably used to come from my desk or basically my team. So I managed the team. I managed a team that was responsible for the poverty updates for Africa, which eventually became split into Africa West and Africa East. But within the sub-Saharan Africa region, we were responsible for making sure that all the updates. So whenever a household survey, so I don't know if you know anything about how poverty is actually measured, which might be one of the more
No,
surprising.
I'm very curious actually.
Okay, so generally, how poverty is typically measured, we use what we call welfare aggregates. So if you go into like your typical household survey, um, if you go into
So
your typical,
you said that associate Nigerian, what was it again?
if you go online and you
Hello?
look at like poverty rate Nigeria, just search Google search poverty rate Nigeria. So those okay before the AI era, I don't know why.
Okay, like
Before the AI era, like one of the
oh,
first
okay, you
things
mean
to
like
see, those numbers actually came from those numbers actually came from my desk, and that number probably still does come from the same team, basically. But it's
okay.
essentially so the poverty and inequality platform of the
Oh
World
well, that
Bank,
makes sense.
would have been that number would have come from those numbers would have come from numbers that my team had to essentially prepare. Um, so that was one side of my job. The more I thought interesting side of my job actually was around subnational poverty estimation, so high resolution poverty estimation. So the idea, so on the one hand, we bring sort of the geospatial lens to the household survey data. So sorry, I think I was supposed to be explaining to you how poverty was measured. So the official way the bank measures poverty is with household surveys. So there are typically household surveys in every country every couple of years or so, and the National Statistical Office within the country is responsible for essentially producing these household surveys. There are these things inside household surveys we call welfare aggregates, and so basically within every household there's a standard roster of things that the household purchases every week, every month, so depending on what the recall period is. And the enumerators who go collecting this data from households will go to the household and tell them, so for this product, how much of it did you buy, and how so did you buy this product? How much of it did you buy? What was the price? And they do it for the whole roster of goods. And every national statistical office around the world basically has that roster that they're collecting this
So
information on. They aggregate it.
what do you consider a household exactly?
That's a good question. So I believe the enumerators basically go to so within a household you have a dwelling ID, but you also have a household. So it's like a family, right? So a family that
Okay.
basically lives in a specific unit, in a specific like
Yeah.
enclosed unit, I suppose is what you would consider a household. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's what they're actually doing when they go and they collect this data. So essentially, what happens then is they take that for a household and they aggregate all those things. So they take how much of a specific product, how much of it was bought, and what the price was, and they aggregate it across all those items to actually estimate what the value of the household's consumption value is. So the way we estimate poverty is actually consumption based. It's based on how much the household is consuming in monetary terms, and then they figure the statistical methods then for figuring out what the poverty line ought to be. So right now, I think the global poverty line, I think using 2021 PPP is $3. It used to be 215. I don't know if you remember when people used to say $1 a day. Remember the whole $1 a day thing? I
Yeah,
don't know if you
yeah.
remember that's where they figure out what the actual poverty. That's them figuring out the poverty line to be the extreme poverty line to be $1 a day. I think that goes all the way back to 2011 PPPs or something.
So
And
when you mean $1 a day, do you mean
yes,
um the price of what you consume per day is $1? Is that what you mean?
no, it means that the value of actual consumption a day is $1. So how many households globally? So this is how many. Well, so in a specific country, how many households are actually consuming the equivalent of $1 a day?
Oh, okay.
Yes, yes.
That makes sense. That
So
makes sense. All right.
shocking thing for you, something that might shock you. The extreme poverty line, at least the last time I checked, when it was still 215, Nigeria. We used to call Nigeria the poverty capital of the world because first of all,
Mm.
Nigeria's population is what, like over 250, almost 250 million, if not more now. And then on top of that, something like 48%, at least the last I checked, under using the 2018, the 2021 household surveys in Nigeria, it was something like 48%. So like half of Nigeria's population was consuming less than $2.15 a day. Right. So that was
Wow.
something like almost 100. So we're talking about almost something like 90 million people or so, something like 90 million people
This
consuming
was
that
which
little.
year?
This was in 20, I'm going to say this was like in 2021. I'm sure there are new numbers now. I wouldn't be surprised if the situation is still as bad. But that's basically, I mean, these are publicly available, so you can check and you can fact check me and get the actual correct numbers as well. But I wouldn't be surprised if something like 80 to 90 million, it's still somewhere around that 80 to 90 million range in terms of the number of people who are in extreme poverty in a country like Nigeria. But that's basically sort of how the bank measures poverty rates. Now, the other side of my work, which I consider to be the more sort of interesting side of my work, but at least I found it the more interesting side of my work. You might disagree. Was actually how do we? So let me make it more. Let me try to make it more intuitive. How do we actually generate like high resolution poverty maps, higher resolution poverty maps? So we've been talking about poverty rates at the national level. But say, for instance, in a place like Ajegunle in Nigeria, would you figure out what the poverty rate was there? In a household survey, maybe in like Nigeria, if you're lucky, you have like maybe 15,000 people in the household survey, right? So maybe if you're lucky, one person in Ajegunle was surveyed. So you can't use the household survey to figure out what the poverty rate is in a place like Ajegunle. So how would you then try to do that for places that small? So at the local government area level, for instance, how would you try to figure out what the poverty rate is within specific, given that maybe if you're lucky, you might have like 10, 15 people there. So that's where the sort of data science comes in, because then you can say, okay, first of all, do you have a census? Nigeria hasn't had a census in quite some time. Nigeria is way overdue for one at this point, right? Um, the way to do that, then we use what we call geospatial data. So that's where satellite imagery comes in, and then we create what we call a synthetic
Yeah.
census using, so on the one hand, using geospatial data that we can assign to the households, but also using that to also create a synthetic census. So you build a model that relates all these geospatial indicators to the welfare aggregates that we found within the household survey, because we know where all those households.
Hey, God. Yeah, I can hear you.
I think I just randomly got kicked off the call.
Oh, please continue.
Okay, I'm sorry. Technical
No,
difficulties.
it's fine.
Anyway, so basically on that front, I think, so I was talking about, where was I? I'm trying to remember where I was. Do you remember where I
Um,
was again? Yes, I remember now. Okay, so if you think about like how we would estimate it as a smaller sort of at a smaller scale, because
yes,
and why
yes,
is that
yeah.
important? It's important because from a policymaker's perspective, if he wants to go do a poverty reduction program, he's not going to do it for all of Nigeria as a whole, right? He wants to do it in a specific. He wants to be able to say, okay, in a specific area, this is what the poverty rate is. This is where the high, like they want to be able to target poverty for poverty reduction, right? So that's generally why you want to do it at a very small scale. And there are all these other things that it's the poverty is also correlated to that you might be interested in doing this for. So, say with all this whole stuff about like climate and figuring out like how do we. So, in the cases of flood, maybe we want to uh, uh, target the areas that are poor because those are the places that might be affected the most by a flood. For instance, you would need high resolution data at that level to be able to know. Okay, so this is the place. This is a place with high risk, high flood risk. But this is also a place. This is also a place where people are also very poor, and maybe this is where we should begin our policy to reduce poverty in that specific area. So this is where the sort of machine learning sort of methodology comes in, because then we can use combination of satellite imagery, and then we can build these models that relate these geospatial indicators to household welfare, and then use it to project into a sort of synthetic census, so to speak. So that was one. That was also another. That was sort of the more interesting. I thought the more sort of data sciencey elements of my work at the time. And then, of course, those fed into the some of the knowledge products of the bank as well. So that was what I did in a poverty sense. And then in November of 2024, I moved to governance, and my work became a little bit different. I'm
So
happy to talk
wait,
about it, but yeah.
I wanted to talk more about what you just said now. So how did you in accessing the satellite images,
Yes.
how was that done? Was it complicated? Was it publicly online?
All
How
publicly available
like
data.
how
This is
how do you get
all
access?
publicly available data.
Oh
Yeah,
wow.
so this is all publicly available data. So actually, the last couple of years, last year or so of my time in governance in poverty, a lot of my work now became actually developing tools around how this was done because there was a huge demand for this. At least at the bank, there's a huge demand for like integrating geospatial attributes. Because imagine this is like freely available data. You can estimate things like how much nighttime lights, right? So from space, NASA is always collecting all this, data about like NASA is always collecting all this data about, you know, night lights basically. So from space, we can actually pick up like how much electrification perhaps is coming from buildings, satellite, what's it called? These poles, these light poles that you see on the street. Like all of these things, you can actually pick up from space, and NASA is always collecting this information, and they essentially collect this data and they store them in what we call rasters online. So if you go on, I think it's the Earth Observation Group. NASA has this website called this EOG website. It's the Earth Observation Group. You'll actually see this raster stored. So a lot of my work actually, towards the end of my time in poverty, actually became trying to develop R packages. So I'm an R programmer, R developer type. So part of my work actually was developing R packages that actually go pick up this data and actually combine them with household surveys, with the household survey data that we get, so we can make that available to poverty economists or whoever people on my team who are actually doing this kind of work. So that kind of data ranges from nighttime lights. You can imagine you're interested in knowing how much rainfall fell within like 100 meters of a specific household. This is important for agricultural reasons. The whole host of this has correlations with poverty. Like there are all these other sort of reasons why beyond poverty, why this is also important. So there were things like nighttime lights, rainfall, you name it. There are all these other sort of geospatial indicators that people might be interested in that I started sort of developing tools around pulling from publicly available sources and actually bringing to the household surveys that we have. So I was developing tools around sort of developing tools around how that was done. So that
Okay.
became, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does, it does, it does. It does. So okay. From like based on the tools you're building, did you at the how did you test them like personally? Like how did you should I say how did you measure its measure success in doing what you wanted it to do?
I think, sorry, you cut off for a second there. Can you repeat that again?
Oh yeah. You said that it was you're basically building packages for other economists to use, like basically building tools for
Well, I was
other
building tools
economists.
for my team to use fundamentally. Many of the
Yeah.
economists that we have at the bank
So my
actually
question.
don't code in R in general.
Okay, okay,
These data types. So a lot of the tools that we built, now we are starting to think about how, and there are teams at the bank who are sort of working on this, trying to figure out, okay, how do we actually take these things and actually bring them to economists? And there's a whole sort of AI is also helping this, and I'm happy to talk about that whenever you want. But AI is also sort of helped this a little bit. Um, but essentially, my work at that time centered around actually bringing these tools and sort of reducing the barriers, because national statistical offices were also coming to us with an interest in being able to do this work. Because you can imagine, they collect data, but they also write reports, right? And it would be nice for them to also be able to integrate, like, supplement what the data that they collect from household surveys with these like geospatial data sets as well. So as I mentioned with the example I gave, it'd be nice if they can also integrate like, okay, so within like a kilometer of this specific household, in the household of all the households in the survey, how much rainfall did they experience? How much nighttime lights, and sort of as a proxy for electrification, how much of that do they have for over the last year, over the last number of years, or however long they're interested in looking at that for as well. So yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So, um, based on reports, or based on the reports that you're able to gather from these tools or these packages, what is something very interesting that you found yourself, like an unexpected result, or something very should I say shocking to you that you found out in your findings,
That's a very good
or
question.
in the reports, basically?
Oh, sorry, you mean like the studies that we do? And well, that's a good question. I mean, I don't know that I would say that anything is. I mean, it's difficult to surprise. I mean, it's difficult to surprise us who have been doing this development thing, because I mean, at some point, like when you look at like the nature of things going on in the world, at some point it's sad, but you kind of get desensitized in many ways. So it's not easy for us to be surprised. At least for me, it's not. I don't get easily surprised. I think one of the things that shocked me, like quite stops you in your tracks almost immediately, that the story that I tell, the thing I told you about the poverty rates in Nigeria being the poverty capital of the world. Things are bad, but when you hear the sheer number of millions of people who are not able to afford like $2.15 a day, like don't consume that much in a day. I mean, for me, that was like probably one of the first, like the biggest thing. And I remember my one of my first projects at the bank. I was doing some poverty mapping work within the India context when I first joined the bank. And I remember like one of the first things one of the sort of, it's, you know how you're writing your papers and like you have an intro section and you have to talk about poverty a little bit. And I remember reading someone's report. I remember reading one of my colleagues writing a report, and it was like, yeah, Nigeria is the poverty capital of the world. I was hot. When I saw that, I got hot immediately, right? Because you see that thing and you're Nigerian, and like, you take that personal. So I went and I was like,
Yeah.
I can't even be mad at that, because it's actually true. Like you go and you do your research and you look at the numbers on what the world bank is producing, and you're like, yeah, it's actually kind of true that is the case, So I think from my own perspective, that had to have been one of the sort of shocking things for me, because you know how like the terrible things are, but then you don't appreciate it until you're like actually in the context. I didn't answer your last question, and I had an answer. I kind of sidestepped your last question. In terms of testing, how do you test that your tool is working? Do you remember asking me that
Yes,
question?
yes, yes, yes,
I
yes.
can't really tell. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. How do you
So
measure success?
how do I measure success? Oh, so that's a different question. That's a different question. So I'll answer the one about testing, and then I'll try to talk about the success one. So I feel like there's two levels of testing from a development perspective. And by development, I mean like from a code development perspective. There's two levels, right? So there is just the internal consistency of the work that you're doing. And I think in the R language where I do, so I'm begrudgingly an R programmer. I'm one of those and this is so hot take, this might make you go viral. So I'm going to say it now. I feel like Python is a little overrated for data science. Yes, that's a hot take. I know it's a hot take. I might get clipped for this. I think it's a little bit overrated Like for me, if your work is still rows and columns, I think you should be doing it in R. Like if a lot of your work is still rows and columns, I don't think Python is the thing for you. I think it has its. I think
Why?
it has
Is it because it's
for machine
slower,
learning,
or
because I think R has developed. I mean, R has. First of all, both languages are open source, and Python is great. I think it has its benefits for sort of general purpose programming, general purpose coding, so to speak. But but R is, I think, very, very specialized for like data science specifically, and the sort of rows and columns analytics that most people who do this data science work are doing. And I think it's also layered all this sort of geospatial. And I think its geospatial libraries in particular are very underrated, at least from my own perspective. I think it's very good. I think it gives Python a very good run for its money on the sort of geospatial front. And I think it's catching up very, very fast, particularly with this whole tidy models approach to doing machine learning and sort of model building that the sort of R space is developing. So from my own perspective, I've almost exclusively actually used R for a lot of the work that I've done, because from sort of the rows and columns sort of data science, which is it's still a little bit old school, but I mean it's still very prevalent in the line of work that I do, particularly with the work that I do for countries. I find that sort of developing our packages is a well sort of structured system. It has a very elaborate unit testing infrastructure as well, which I have leveraged for the work that I'm doing on building those tools. And I think leaning on that and just making sure that all the unit tests are properly done. By the way, the whole AI space has helped this so much because I don't write my own unit tests anymore. I find that a lot of my work now is basically like software architecture. Like I can spend like 2 weeks just designing what it is that I want to build, and then like the thing will just go and execute it in like an hour, 30 minutes sometimes. So that has more or less. So that's one. I feel like that's one side of that's sort of one side of what I do when it comes to testing. The other thing that we do when it comes to testing, I feel like triangulation is also very important. So you go and you pull nighttime lights for a specific country, you have to correlate it as well with like what you're seeing from. So on the one hand, you pull nighttime lights data, but we also have data within household surveys on electrification, right? So household access to electricity. So like if those two things are not lining up, then maybe there's something wrong with the quality of the data that I'm pulling. So those are the kinds of things that we check. Now, in terms of success, how do I actually measure success? That's a more difficult question, because I think I would like to say that. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. So I would like to say that we produce these poverty maps, and then we share it with the government. The government looks at it, and then there's some kind of evaluation that goes at the end, right? From our own perspective, I would like to hope that we did that more often, which is to say, okay, we developed this poverty map for a specific country, right? 3, 4, 5 years down the line, now they have done a census. Can we actually compare the poverty map that we generated with the estimates that we actually that would have come if we actually had the creme de la creme, which is the census, and we could actually estimate the welfare aggregates into the census and actually compare the both of them? How do those two things line up? Like that would be nice to be able to do. That would be nice to. I would like to see that we did that more often, but the way things generally go is that project comes, project goes, and you move on. But yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, I don't know if this is. I feel like this got very technical, and it's not obvious to me how useful it is for your viewers. But
no, it is. Because that's interesting part of what you do, the technical side of it. Well, personally speaking, Shao. So, okay, so that was poverty basically. So you said you recently moved
yeah,
into
now
something
so
else. What
I'm
was
now in
that?
governance, and my work is different now. But go ahead. You're breaking.
Governance. Okay. Actually, hello.
Hello. Yeah, you're breaking for a second. Can you hear me?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I wanted to ask. Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask, you being in poverty, what was the biggest challenge for you? Generally speaking, it can be the technical side, it can be
So, so
Just in generally speaking, what was like the biggest challenge to
the
you?
biggest challenge. Well, I think that's a good question. So there's a couple of things. I feel like the data science field tends to be a little bit farther ahead of where, at least when I was still in poverty, there's the frontier of data science, and then there is what the bank has to do, right? So in the sense that it would be nice for me to be able to say, oh, so I got this, and then I went into and I got to do machine learning. I got to use like a neural network model, or I got to build like use a gradient boosting algorithm to estimate an official poverty map for a country. The difficulty with doing that, and actually it becoming the official poverty map of the country, is that you know the poverty practice will have difficulty sanctioning that, in part because you know how machine learning goes, right? It's kind of like a black box in a way, right? In the sense that for you to be able
Okay.
to take a poverty map to a government, the government wants to know why that poverty map is like, you have to be able to explain to the government, oh, this is actually what is driving poverty in your country as well, right? Like these are the variables that we found to be
Oh,
most important for explaining poverty, and this is why, and this is the mechanism by which they're explaining poverty in your country. Machine learning is great because it gives you that accuracy, but at the expense of a black box, right? It gives it to you in a sort of a black box, and to a certain extent. There's only so much that you can get out of that, and so it's difficult then. And I completely understand like where the poverty practice is when we have our guidelines and we say this is how we like. If you go online right now, you should be able to find the poverty maps, the poverty practices guidelines for small area estimation that governs how subnational poverty estimation at the sort of admin. So in the case of Nigeria, at the sort of local government area level, how that is done and is officially sanctioned by the poverty practice. You'll notice if you read that document that, at least to the best of my knowledge, I don't know, maybe hopefully that hasn't now changed, but you'll notice that we don't at least at the time, we didn't sanction the use of machine learning. We talk about it, but it's not the official way that we actually do poverty mapping, because when you develop that poverty map, there is only so much you can tell the government as to this is what's driving poverty and this is why it's driving poverty. Now we have to use other sort of methods that are like, so in our case we use linear mixed effects models, for instance, which is not exactly machine learning, but does a decent enough job at actually giving you the poverty rates at lower levels and giving you a sort of level of precision as well. So like how precise are those? Because you don't just want to give a poverty rate for a specific area. You also want to tell, okay, so here are the confidence bounds on those poverty rates as well. So we can do that and give you those confidence bounds and then explain to the country as well in deliberations with the government. So this is why it's happening as well. So I would say that the biggest challenge we had was knowing that there are better methods out there that we can be using, but there's only so far we can go. We can actually use them for countries as well. So I would say in my line before, that was the biggest challenge.
okay, okay. Oh, wow. So, in the case of, so can you mention the governments that you've worked with? You're allowed to do that.
I mean,
Can
the
you hear
country.
me?
So yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear
So
you.
I was assigned. So I can tell you that I was assigned to the Africa West, and I was assigned to Africa East, right? In my last 3 or 4 years or so in the poverty practice, I worked with a number of governments in the Africa East region. I think that's the sort of best I can give you. I don't want to sort of give you more information than I am legally able to. But
Yeah,
we
allowed to.
worked with governments. I
Okay.
was assigned to Africa East. I think that's the best I can give you. And I did some other work in a number of other countries in Africa West. Um, yeah.
All right. Okay. Sorry, I'm reading my questions. Let's get to the questions. How long will it? So, when surveying data in African countries, what would you say are the biggest gaps? Like what when I mean gaps, I mean um you lack data set in that aspect when it comes to surveying for like Africa.
Okay, so I think I can actually talk about this more generally, right? Because I think they're obvious, at least to me. Now that I'm in governance, my manager would be not very pleased if I didn't mention this. So actually, I guess if she was going to watch this, I don't know how likely that is,
Okay.
but if she was going to watch this, I will go ahead and say, first of all, we don't have governance. We don't, most household surveys, until very recently, most household surveys don't collect any governance information. So, like, did you vote in your last election? Why didn't you
Hmm.
vote in your last election? What's your access to? Do you feel like your voice is being heard? Most household surveys don't actually collect that information, right? Which in many ways is a kind of loss. Now, that's in the coming. I hear through the grapevine that is. I've been in discussions, and I know that's going to change going forward. That's likely to change going forward. And in fact, there's some countries, even in West Africa, that are slowly but steadily begin to have sort of trying to integrate governance into official, what it calls official statistics, right? So that's likely to begin to change going forward. But I think that's probably the bigger thing, and being able to correlate that with poverty as well, right? So how are governance structures within specific countries actually affecting the poorest people and the most underprivileged within a particular country, right? So you can imagine how that has serious policy implications and why that would be important for governments to want to know that. But that's information that in the past has not been collected. Um, yeah, I would say that's probably the biggest thing
Hmm.
right now, given where I am.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. So in regards to policy making, I don't know whether you're allowed to disclose this, but um among all the public policies regarding Africa, or maybe you can talk for countries in Africa, which would you necessarily disagree with, if that makes sense?
Oh, um, so personal take.
Yes, personal
That's a
take.
good question. So I am not. So I'll talk about the Nigeria case, and this has nothing to do with the bank. This has nothing. This is just my own personal opinion. I'm not convinced about those subsidies, those fuel subsidies that we did. I think the evidence now seems to be showing, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, but the evidence actually seems to be showing, and we have like data to. I think there's data to support this actually. I think is it SMAP that does this, or the energy subsidy reform assessments folks. Um, they show that these subsidy programs actually go to the richest people, right? So these are kinds
Interesting.
of things that you hear people talking about, right? These are the kinds of things you actually hear people talking about. There's actual evidence for this now, right? There's actual evidence to support this now that actually, when you do these fuel subsidy things, actually the money actually goes to the richest people, right? We actually have data to support that now. So for me, I think that would probably be that's right off the top of my head right now. That's probably the one thing that I would say, at least from a Nigerian context, that I would say that I probably don't agree
Wow.
with. Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. So there's actual data for this type of thing.
I think there's actual, now I don't know if the Nigeria case specifically has data to support this, right? But I know that other contexts have actually produced data that actually show, like, if you combine, you take household surveys and you run some of these simulations, like, you actually find that the fuel subsidy style, reforms don't actually reach the poorest people. But again, that's not necessarily the most surprising thing, right? So if you think about how these, like, policies that generally target the poor, right? If you look at policies that generally, so one thing that people seem to always attribute to corruption, which may or may not be true, right? There's corruption. There's also the fact that just we're just not very good at doing certain things, right?
Yeah.
So figuring out like here in the United States, it's not difficult to figure out who's poor and who's not, because everyone comes up, they have jobs, they come with a paycheck, and they're oftentimes official. It's not as difficult figuring out like how much someone is making in a month, right? So if you look at uh, um, poverty or welfare from the perspective of how much someone is making as opposed to how much someone is consuming, like we do in the
Hmm.
more developing country context. Now, in the sort of more developing country context where people don't officially get like most people have informal jobs. They don't like get like a steady paycheck that that you can easily measure. Their payments is ad hoc, and maybe the lady who's like selling tomatoes on the side of the street, for instance, that sort of thing. In that context, it's difficult to figure out who's poor, and we use models actually to do what we call means testing. I don't know if you've ever heard about this. It's called means testing. So
No, no,
basically,
no, I haven't.
using household survey data to predict what to estimate to train a model and estimate welfare, and then predicting welfare in like a social registry, right? So that's administrative data that will contain like information about like all the people in the country, and then using that to figure out based on the social registry like who's poor and who's not. Those prediction models can be wrong. Those prediction
Yeah.
models can have false positives. So that's people who are not poor, who you're claiming are poor, and then you go and you hand them money. And if that's the basis for like a fuel subsidy, then you are assigning money to people who actually you don't want to assign money. So there's that element of it as well, right? So, and in fact, there are ways of actually estimating. There are ways of actually estimating how much money you waste by doing that, right? So it's easy to look at a country and say, oh yeah, you guys are oh, it's because of corruption. It doesn't have to be that case. It doesn't have to be that way. It could just be the case that actually we're bad at building these models. We don't have the expertise to build these models, and we tried and didn't do it well, and hence we had a fuel subsidy and we gave money to the wrong people. So that's one.
Wow. Yeah.
There's also the situation, of course. There's also the case of the corruption that we often see in many of our countries where someone is in power and they're giving money to people who are more likely to vote for them, and they try to figure that out, and then that's also a thing as well. I'm not trying to minimize that, but I'm just trying to show you from their own perspective. Sometimes good intentions don't always have the best outcomes, right? So
Yes, yes, exactly. So, okay, let's talk from a general perspective.
yeah.
What you deal with so much data regarding poverty. Let's go back a bit. So what are major misconceptions you see about global poverty? Like things that the layman say, and you're like, well, do you understand?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I know. I think I know what you mean. Um, Global misconceptions. Well, for one, a lot of people don't actually like the thing I explained to you just now. I think a lot of people don't actually know how poverty is measured. Like the World Bank's official way
Yeah.
of like using consumption based, measures of poverty.
Consumption
People don't actually
rates. Yeah.
know. People don't actually know what that means. I mean, you know, funny thing. One of the things my father told me when I first came to the United States, whenever you're buying something, don't convert it directly into naira, because the naira and the dollar, like, it's not the same. Like, if you do that, you will never buy anything here in the United States. It's very true, but like, I'll be talking to my mom. I'll be talking to my mom on occasion, or someone else. Or talking to some people on occasion, and I'll say, "Oh, we spent this," and then they'll go translate it to naira and be like, "What are you? Do you know how much money that is? You just went to dinner and you blew X amount of money, and it turns out like I spent like $20 or something on dinner or something." And then when I tell people that, "Oh, I spent $20 and I went to buy this," and they're like, so you can imagine that if you have that sort of perspective on sort of if you're doing that still, then you will get a lot of things about like how, for instance, like what's the value of $2? Like what does $2 in Nigeria versus $2 in the United States? Like what does that actually mean? How does that actually translate? When we talk about purchasing power parity, what does that actually mean? How is the consumer price index applied? Like all those things. I feel like these are things that people probably get mixed up all the time, I would say. And even funny enough, even people who I work with don't fully like. It's only the people who are sort of who have to do this poverty work that fully understand it to a certain extent. But even people who I work with who are not in poverty but who are at the bank, who are not necessarily economists, don't actually understand how that system works. They just use like the final products that come out of like the poverty practice or like the macro people, and they use that. But like, it's not their line of work. And in the same way, the people who work in poverty don't understand certain elements of like governance and yeah. So, but yeah.
I
I
have
would
a
say
very
the biggest
interesting
perception is
question.
that. Go ahead. Let me hear it.
Okay, so what is the relationship between GDP and poverty of a country?
That's a very good question. So they don't always track, right? So GDP is supposed to be the value of. So I'm giving you the Econ 101 sort of definition of GDP now. So GDP is supposed to be the value of final goods and products, right, in an economy,
Yes.
right? Now, if your country is in war and they're spending all this money on buying like weapons, your GDP will go up. It has no value for the people who, for the poorest people in your country, but your GDP will go up, right? So there is that. I'm just trying to give you a sort of extreme case where you can see like a country that is growing while its people are getting poorer, right? Um, so and and so I guess I can talk about this AI thing a little bit, and this is one of those risks as well, right? Where you can have like an economy becoming more productive, right? An economy becoming more productive, and actually their GDP numbers going up, but potentially the poorest poor of the poor, the number of the people who are considered poor are also increasing. Like this is a perennial problem, right? This is a perennial problem that poverty economists, macroeconomists at the bank are always contending with. That relationship between GDP or economic growth, so to speak, and poverty. You can't. It is possible to have an economy that is growing while its people are getting poorer. This is a story as old as we've started measuring those statistics in almost every world. In so many, the incidence of that, like that's the idea of like growing poverty, and growing economies at the same time. This is this is a story as old as time. Essentially, this is a story as old as you can imagine, and you will find World Bank reports that actually talk about that almost all the time, right? So the Nigerian economy is a very good example of this. Actually, GDP will almost always grow in Nigeria unless Nigeria is in a recession. But that doesn't stop the poverty rates from going up as well. At the same time, that's happening, right? Because those are two related but different mechanisms, right? There is the mechanism by which that's happening. I
When
don't
you
know if what
mean, sorry, when you mean,
it's
no,
possible.
no, it makes sense. When
Yeah.
you mean different mechanism, you mean so what do you mean by different mechanism exactly? Do you mean like how it's measured or
Well, there is that. There is measurement. Well, there is measurements, but even just from an intuitive perspective, think about what GDP is. GDP is the value of the final, like the sum total value of the final goods and products produced in an economy, right? Final goods and products. Poverty, on the other hand, is measured with welfare aggregates, like how much a household is consuming.
yes,
What
yes, yes.
It's not obvious to me why we should always think that just because the value of the final goods and products in the country is going up, that poverty will go down at
Mm,
the same time. It should be the case, right? In an economy that is working properly, that should be the case, but that is not necessarily always going to be true. It is possible to have, and I gave you the example of a war economy, right? So an economy in war, they're spending all this money on weapons, and yes, that will make their GDP go up. They're not really producing, because GDP is also not making the distinction between different kinds of value. You understand what I mean? It's not making the distinction
yeah.
between different kinds of value in a way that it affects those who are actually poor. So you can have the case that an economy is actually getting bigger and it's growing, right? And at the same time, the number of people who are considered poor are actually increasing as well. Or the
Increasing.
percentage of people who are considered poor. Because the question then becomes, who is the wealth of the country actually accruing to? If the wealth of the country is accruing to those who are the richest, then yes. And this is where the whole concept of inequality comes in as well. So oftentimes you have the case where GDP is growing, poverty rates are going down, are also increasing. Oftentimes you will find that the amount of inequality within the country, so the difference between the haves and the have-nots, is also increasing as well as the GDP is also going up. So it is very possible.
That's very interesting. Yeah, it's a perfect a country that's a perfect example for this is actually Nigeria.
Yes.
Yeah.
But so
Okay.
not to badmouth Nigeria. There are a lot of countries that are in this bucket, right? There are a lot of countries in this bucket. It's these things are difficult to figure out, right? These things are not the easiest things to figure out. Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, let's talk a bit about GDP. Do you think well, we're seeing this now, what um countries that, should I say, produce AI, like for example, the US, do you think it's in the future, do you think it's going to be a major factor to the to a country's GDP growth? AI.
I mean, that's a
Maybe
good question.
AI
That's a good.
infrastructure, basically.
I mean, there is a race, right? There is a race. There's a race between the United States, China, and some of the sort of developed countries now for sort of AI, so to speak, right? So I'm assuming the reason there's a race is because some countries think there's value, see the value in this. Um, so yeah, I mean, I do think going forward, I mean, it's already beginning to look like, it's already. I mean, if the goal is to improve productivity and productivity, right, affects GDP and affects some of these macroeconomic indicators that we care about, and that's what AI does, right? What AI does supposedly is improve productivity. Um, I can only see that going one way, just from my own perspective. This is what I think. This is what I could be wrong, right? There's no way for anyone to say for sure that they know, but the early signs seems to be that I think in many ways it's going to. First of all, it's reshaping the labor markets as we speak, right? So I don't know if you know, but at least from here, from the U.S. perspective, here in the United States, those coming out of it used to be the case that you could tell someone if you code, you will never be out of a job. I remember as I was growing up, that used to be a thing. If you could code, you will never be out of a job. That's not so true anymore, right? Even here in the United States, a lot of people coming out of undergrad with computer science degrees come out months, years, no job, right? Because those sort of entry level positions, those entry level coding positions, are more or less gone. Are more or less gone now here in the United States because a lot of these companies are realizing, yeah, I mean, my team doesn't have to be so big anymore. And a lot of the things that I would have had like an entry level coder do is something that I can outsource to an AI. I mean, look up from my own perspective. For instance, I develop a lot of tools, even in my department now, that we use for a wide range. We use for a wide range of things, right? One of my mandates is developing these tools. Hopefully, that will go sit in like a government, I don't know, like a government human resources management information system, right, for like payroll and things like that. And I am the one, like it's me and another guy who I work with on our team who are like developed this suite of tools by ourselves. And a lot of our work is actually not sitting down and writing hard code like I used to. I kind of missed it a little bit, but now a lot of my work actually is designing software infrastructure in precise enough detail that the AI can go and just execute my brainchild, so to speak, right? And the more and more that becomes, prevalent in society and becomes prevalent in society, I think the more it will begin to sort of determine, the final product of what countries are producing. I don't know. That's just my own. To me, I just sense that this AI thing is not going away. When it first came out, I was like, this
Yeah.
is just a fad that will go away. It's at the end of the day, it's just loss minimization. How much better are these models going to get? But I feel like you ignore the AI sort of revolution at your own peril at this point.
Mm.
That's just my own sense of things. Maybe that's a hot take, and
This
maybe I'll
is,
talk in a few years. But yeah,
this is a perfect segue to what I'm about to ask. With regard to policy making, um, is there a world where people where AI will independently influence public policies?
so it
Not in
depends
the
on what you
sense
mean.
that
Mm-hmm.
exactly, not in the sense that a policymaker would use an AI tool to get better answers or research. I mean, like um like you will, should I say, major decisions are made from the outputs an AI gives you in regards to policy making? Do you think there's a world um like that exists
I
in the
mean,
future?
that kind of what you're saying, in at least in small levels, that kind of exists already, right? So
Hello?
I can give you anonymous projects that I have been sort of invited to come and sort of, people do projects, and they make presentations and whatnot, and then they ask sort of technical expert types to come and sit in the presentation and give them ideas about what they think. So I will give you sort of a preview of some discussions that I have been part of. There's a project that I know of right now, that one of my colleagues is working on at the moment, where he invited us to come. He invited us to come and just sit and talk. And he made a presentation about like some of the work that they're doing, and they're basically trying to figure out, like, they're using AI actually to collect data, right? And the idea being, how are people interacting with the websites that their governments are creating to access services, right? So imagine, for instance, that you want to get your NIN, right? So think about it from the perspective of Nigeria. You're trying to get your NIN, so your national identification number, yada yada yada. You need to get your national ID card and all that stuff. Can you go on ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT to tell you where the website is, what forms you have to fill out, and all of that? Is that possible? Is that available? So it's kind of like an AI readiness survey for
Okay.
governments. Like, how AI capable are the websites that they're like? How capable are the websites that they're, or how friendly are the websites that they're creating, such that these large language models can actually be prompted. Individuals can go and collect the information that they need on some kind of service that the government is providing, and they figure out how to like use. So they basically write these prompts. The AIs, and they use like R and stuff. They write like these things. I think one of my friends did this in Python, uh, um, where they basically set up a system, make an API call to one of these large language models, and they pass it several prompts, and it goes through all the countries, like, and it basically just put it on loop, right, for country X, and they pass it to a wide range of countries, and they use a number of large language models, and they figure out a scoring, right, on a whole host of questions that has to do with, for different sectors, questions that individuals might have on how they can access services, so that they can go back to governments and say, hey, look, people actually can't find your websites for service X. And they give them
Mm.
the scores, and they show them basically how they relate to, also, how well are you on this dimension compared to other countries as well, because that sort of thing matters to countries. Because, believe it or not, actually, investors are interested in this kind of information as well, because it helps them make determinations as to whether or not I should come and invest in a specific country, because so service is available that my business can use. So there are lots of reasons why countries could be interested in that sort of thing. That kind of work is already going on at institutions like mine, and at some point, that data will become publicly available, and countries will be making decisions based on that sort of data as well. So, in many
That makes
ways,
sense.
maybe not in the way you think about it, but maybe not in the way you were envisioning. But I feel like that's already happening.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, you said you wanted to talk about. I'm trying to keep up the time though. So I still have a lot of questions to ask, but like I promised like an hour. So
Yeah. We can
um
also have a follow up session at some point if your viewers find this to be interesting. If
definitely,
your viewers
definitely,
find
definitely.
my rambling to be interesting, uh, yeah, we can always
Yeah,
go for it.
for sure, definitely. Like there are a lot of things I want to discuss outside because I will try my best to just stick to data science, but I mean like we were able to touch on everything slightly. So maybe like follow-up sessions we'll try to branch out of data science and other
Fair
things
enough.
that you find interesting, and you yeah, other things you find interesting. So you wanted to talk about how AI helps, or how AI has helped with the work you do. I don't know whether you want to touch on that still.
Oh yeah, so I mean, it's night and day now. Like the way I used to work, the way I used to write code now versus like I don't know, even 4 months ago. It's complete like night and day. I used to be the type who like I spent a lot of my time just coding, writing my own code and writing my own unit tests, developing my own packages and libraries and all that stuff. I used to be that person before. Now it's a little bit different. I feel like I spend a lot more of my time now just designing, right? So it's not vibe coding. It's definitely not vibe coding because I'm not just going into a prompt and this whole. I don't know if you know this whole vibe coding thing. Have you ever heard about this?
No, I
You
do.
don't know
Yeah,
about
I
this?
do.
Okay. So there's this whole thing about vibe coding now where people go into their IDEs and they just like, hey, I want to create an app that does yada yada yada
Yeah,
yada yada yada, and they just like write something like, and then AI just creates something, and then they just, hey, here it is. It's not that. I feel like, so I'll give
yeah,
you an example. Right now, I'm developing a simulation engine for HRMIS data. So HRM data is Human Resources Information Management System. That probably doesn't mean anything to you, but oftentimes governments are interested in optimizing on their payroll. So oftentimes governments will come to the bank and just be like, hey, so the public sector payroll is spiraling out of control in the sense that like every year we are paying significantly more money than we were paying out either in pensions or in paying our staff across the entire federal government. And we need to figure out how to optimize this and sort of either help reduce our wage bill, make our wage bill a little bit more efficient, or they will come and be like, hey, this AI revolution is becoming a thing. How do we actually like change our workforce a little bit? Okay. So things like that. And so we at the bank will oftentimes be like, okay, can you give us access to your HRMIS system? Can you just send us all the data you have about like the employees that you have in your government, what department they're working in, what's their pay grade, what is the name of their occupation, how much are they being paid, like all that sort of information, and give it to us like in longitudinal sense. So for every reference period kind of thing. So give us for like every year of that data that you have as far back as you can go, just hand it to us. And then our job then is then to figure out how to clean that data, prepare that data. We prepare sort of the statistics that they care about. So first of all, what's the wage bill? How does it differ by department? How does it differ by pay grade? That sort of thing. They will also give us their pay scale as well, and they will have questions around like, okay, can we compress the pay scale a little bit? That's the difference between like the amount of people, the sort of the lowest sort of level of the pay grade and the highest level, that sort of thing. Like what impact is that going to have on our pay grade? So they're interested in, figuring out if we implemented this policy in our workforce, what impact is that going to have on our pay grade? So I started developing. I joined our department about a year and a half ago, and about 3 weeks ago, or about a month ago or so, I decided I was going to create an engine for actually doing this sort of thing. So a country shows up and they have that problem. We clean their data to a specific standard, and then we go ahead and actually develop a proper system. We
yeah,
have a system that we have developed is then used to actually run these simulations. So that's the sort of system. I spent the last month doing the design for this system. So like a lot of it actually is me writing pseudocode, so to speak. Um, yeah, so it's like writing me right. It's not code per se, but it's like me because I know how I would do
yeah,
this if I
yeah,
do it, if I wanted to do it. But what's the point of me doing this if I know that I can actually just give my brainchild? And I've spent quite a lot of time, like basically teaching Claude Sonnet 4.6 inside of my Positron IDE how exactly I like writing code. Like I've spent a lot of time like optimizing and like giving it specific, like these are my coding standards. This is how I like. So I write these prompt files. They're sitting inside my internal development, my IDE, and it just knows whenever it's writing me code, this is how I want you to write it. And then I have these like very specific prompt files that I write for the specific project itself that I wanted to execute. So I spent some time like developing this, and then in piecemeal, I have it like write me certain functions, and then I take a look at it, make sure that it's doing exactly what I want. I review the code myself, have it also review its own code too. So I iterate on things like that, and I'm sort of that's basically what my work has become essentially. So the turnover. So a project like the one I'm working on would have taken me like a year to do. I've done it. I more or less developed this now in 2 weeks. I made a presentation to
Two
a government.
weeks.
Yeah, it took me literally 2 weeks. Something that would have normally taken me like a year to do. And by the way, it was ready in like 3 hours. But I spent the next like week and change
Debugging.
doing a lot of debugging, trying to see like, okay, so I don't want you to write a for loop here. I actually want you to vectorize this system, stuff like that, because that's more efficient, like things like that. Trying to get the AI as well to learn my own patterns as well, so that next time it doesn't have to make the same mistakes twice, sort of thing. So that's been my sort of interaction with that's one level of my interaction with the AI. And I feel like that is in itself, I feel like that's sort of the frontier in terms of how we interact with AI to code. But also one of the things that I'm trying to learn how to do now, I don't think I'm ever going to become an AI engineer. I'm not going to be one of these 25, 26-year-old types who is like developing these large language models. I don't think that's going to be my thing. But I sense that if you don't know how to AI empower the tools that you build, I feel like going forward in the future, you will be out of a job. Like I'm looking at the AI space right now, and I just don't see how people like myself, who used to be I'm just going to sit down and just code and just write code. I just don't see how they will survive 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, right? So one of the things that I'm trying to figure, I'm trying to teach myself how to do now, and I'm still fairly new to a lot of this, is how do I embed or how do I introduce like AI capabilities into the things that I develop? So for instance, this simulation engine, at some point, I'm going to create an AI chatbot. I'm going to use, Claude Sonnet or something, the Claude Sonnet provision that the bank gives us, and sort of try to figure out how to embed it into the system that I develop so that my users don't have to actually write code. They can just write a prompt and be like, hey, I want to be able to simulate the impact of, a wage compression on the wage bill and project it out 10 years. And the AI will not actually implement this on its own, but use the tools that I developed to actually do that. I feel like if we don't figure out how to do that sort of thing, someone else is going to do it, and then we just basically we'll just be caught holding the bag, basically. So I don't know. That kind of thing is what I'm working on these days.
So when your AI is running, what do you do? Like when you
good question.
Run, what do you
Good question. So I don't know if you know. I don't think you and I ever talked about this before, but I love football a lot. Nigeria soccer, that is. This is terrible. But yeah, I love soccer a lot. And you know what would be cool, actually? I would like to see, like, the scouting teams. I feel like there's so much data science in football that no one ever talks about. There's so much, like,
how so do
there's
you mean?
so much data science in football. There has to be, right? There has to be so much data science in football that nobody talks about. Like, how are they scouting players? Like, I'm sure teams like Liverpool and United and Arsenal have to have huge databases of, like, players, and they collect all this information about these players, and they're updating them, and they're trying to use it to figure out, like, who's going to be the next Moses Caicedo, for instance. So, like, defensive midfielders are all the rage right now, right? So who's going to be the next Moses Caicedo, and how can I spot him and bring him to my team for next to nothing and turn him into like £100 million player, sort of thing, right? I feel like there has to be like data science approaches to this. It's just I don't have the time. I'm so busy all the time. I don't have the time to do this sort of thing. But I feel like teams are doing this stuff. And if I had the time, I would totally be into, like, if I could get into their databases and play around with the kind of data that they have, I'd totally be into this. So that sort of thing, like the NBA, to me, the NBA is even more interesting, right? Because now you have to figure out, like, it's a huge optimization problem. how do I figure out how to construct a roster, right? How do I figure out how to construct an NBA roster given all the given the salary cap, given like the structure of contracts that players ought to have, given their age, how long they've been in the league, like whether they're a rookie versus like how do I recruit like the next rookie, the next like how do I recruit the next Jason Tatum or the next like Jaylen Brown or the next like Wembanyama, that sort of thing. How do I recruit him, get him onto my team? Like, what is the composition of my roster right now that gives me the enough cap space? Like all these kinds of information. I'd be totally into like getting into that sort of thing if I had the time and if I could find the data for that sort of thing. But alas, I'm in a different world. Well, this is the sort of thing that I would like to spend my time on. But outside, when my code is running and writing me stuff, I just go around and I talk to like my colleagues in the office, and maybe that's the time to go send emails, my email, and find and try to see if or watch football sometimes. Yeah.
Okay. If let's say you had all the data you can get in regards to NBA, do you think you'll be able to predict who plays for the finals?
That's a very good question. That is so. Who plays for the finals? That's a lot. That's a lot. I don't know if I'll be able to predict it. I could try. I'll probably be wrong, but I can try.
What?
I could absolutely. I'll probably be
What
wrong.
do you think?
but not, there'll be nothing that'll stop me from trying.
But do you think there are things out there already? Do you think there are models out there already that at
I'm
least
sure there are
not
people doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are people doing that. I'm sure there are people who are spending their time writing algorithms, trying to figure out who the next NBA champion is going to be, yada yada yada. I'm sure it's an interesting exercise. What is more interesting to me, actually, right, is how you can use data science to actually construct your rosters properly, right? How you use data science to construct your rosters properly, and then in terms of gameplay, like there's a 3-point. So there's a 3-point revolution right now in the NBA. It took us what 30, 40 years to figure out that 3 is more than 2, right? And that given the percentages of where like guys shoot threes on the floor, actually it makes sense if you can get a corner 3. That's probably you should take a corner 3. So that's why you see all these teams now. I don't know if you've noticed. I don't know how much of the NBA you watch, but just to nerd out a little bit about this. But you find all these teams now that like will pass up an open layup for a corner 3 because the probability of making that 3, right, is not so low.
It's high.
It's high enough, right?
Okay.
It's high enough that actually it's worth passing up a layup or a dunk for a wide open corner. So like, there's all these teams like the Celtics. I felt like they built that 2024 championship? Was it in 2024 they won the NBA championship? They built literally their 2024 championship on the basis of good shot making,
spot ups.
Yeah, spot up threes, like finding, optimizing. So it seems like they are a high volume people call them a high volume 3-point shooting team. But to me, I sort of look at it like they're not actually shooting. They're not just hunting threes. I feel like they're moving the ball around and trying to find the best shot. And if they can get a corner 3 out of it, then great. If that's a layup, then great. It just happens to be the case that given the way teams are defending against them, they just happen to find wide open 3s, and that's what they make. That's sort of how I see when I watch the Celtics play. That's what it looks like to me. But it's interesting to sort of see what analytics is doing, and also the interpretation of analytics as well, right? Because oftentimes I watch the Celtics play and I'm like pulling teeth, and I'm like, okay, you've shot this many threes. Maybe you should start hunting. You've clanked to the last like 10 3-pointers. Maybe it's time to get a layup and at least get on the board, right? Yeah.